Today, we want to talk to you guys about podcasts.
Podcasting is a word that's concatenation of iPod and broadcasting.
You've probably noticed that a lot of your favorite YouTube creators are starting podcasts.
I want to start a podcast.
What if we build our podcasting studio back here?
We are building and starting a podcast.
Why exactly is this happening? What can audio offer someone who makes video?
Also in this video, we're going to plug our podcast.
That was plug number one.
Before we talk about podcasting today, let's take a look at the history of podcasting.
Yeah, okay. In 2005, Apple released 3,000 free podcasts on iTunes.
Sort of like TiVo for radio for your iPod.
In 2008, with the release of the iPhone 3G, you can now download podcasts on the go.
Fast forward to 2014, and iOS 8 now has a standalone podcast app.
And also in 2014 was the release of Serial.
From This American Life and WBEZ Chicago, it's Serial. One story told week by week.
The success of Serial is astonishing.
And that really brought podcasts into the mainstream.
Could we basically compete with Netflix and HBO and do what the best series do on television?
That was the first podcast I listened to.
How many times was that downloaded? Hold on.
Okay, here it is. Serial was the fastest podcast to reach 5 million downloads and streams in Apple's history.
You know, one thing in our video, we talk about Serial. 5 million an episode feels really large, and it is. But then we were talking about Logan Paul, and Logan Paul doing on his daily vlog 4 to 6 million views an episode.
The audiences on YouTube are huge, and their ability to move them around is probably unlike any other platform.
Since Serial, there have been a ton of podcasts uploaded.
There's over 8,000 podcasts today.
And actually, there's about 525,000 active podcasts.
More podcasts, more listeners, and now more advertisers.
Money has happened to podcasting. Money is being invested in the space. Money is being extracted from the space in ways that it never has been.
So now looking at it from the perspective of YouTubers and creators, why start a podcast now? There's advertising dollars to be had, and a lot of YouTubers already have an audience. So you can drive that audience to your podcast, diversify your platforms, and now get two different sources of revenue.
Advertisers really like podcasts.
It offers highly creative opportunities, high engagement, and the chance to reach consumers while they are on the move.
There's actually not even enough podcasts to fulfill all the advertiser demand.
Thank you to Omaha Steaks, Lyft, MeUndies, and Honey for sponsoring this episode.
So that's probably why you're seeing audio format advertising in videos.
This video is brought to you by Squarespace.
So to give you some numbers on advertising, about $207 million were spent on ads in podcasts last year, and it's projected to get up to $400 million by 2020.
Such a small percentage of people are listening to podcasts now. It's only going to grow from here. But also, I guess if you think about it, we shouldn't be making something just because we want to build an audience, like, period. We should do it because we enjoy making stuff.
Also, the formats for podcasts have not been defined yet. There's a lot of room creatively to come up with new, interesting ways to create podcasts. There's interview podcasts, there's scripted podcasts, documentary style podcasts. I would love to see someone daily vlog as a podcast.
That would be really interesting. Wait, check this out. That's pretty messed up. So there's actually a lot of opportunities if you're a YouTuber to create videos and audio out of one session of creating content. And a lot of creators are doing that. Like Casey Neistat right now is doing couples therapy. He's filming that as well.
It's very awkward because there's 3 cameras, lighting, no one else down here. We're talking to each other with microphones and headphones on, and you have sunglasses on.
Someone who does this really well is our friend Matt Diavella.
Probably better than like anyone.
Since I film all my podcasts, 3 camera setup and lighting and the whole thing, I can then break those down into teasers for Instagram. I can do these excerpts where I break down certain ideas within the podcast.
So there's just so much that can come out of one podcast. Some YouTubers are even launching their own channels for their podcast. H3 Podcast is a great example of this.
They're also a great example of how you can use a podcast to create collaborations for your channel. We mentioned Casey, but we didn't talk about 368, specifically preparing for creators to come in and start podcasts.
368 is even building a podcast studio.
People who are interested in doing podcasts, they could come here, do it out of here. We'll have the production resources. We will have by then partnered with a distribution partner, and it's sort of plug and play podcasting, but on a really professional level.
So clearly they're seeing the value in YouTubers launching podcasts.
We went to a conference on podcasts when we were at South by Southwest, and Samir asked a question.
Just curious your guys' thoughts around the custom
podcasts.
I just wanted to bring it up that you asked a question because you know, like when you're at a panel or a conference and they ask, like, does anyone have any questions? Most people are like, I don't want to.
Yeah, I actually stood in
I
the
don't
line.
want to ruffle any feathers.
You go up to the mic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was fun.
It was good. It was cool.
But I was interested in learning about podcasts because we're launching a podcast.
That's plug number 2. Also, we've noticed that talk shows have gotten really big. Specifically on Netflix, there is a talk show called The Off-Camera Show with Sam Jones. So the interesting thing here is that Netflix bought a pre-existing show from someone's YouTube channel. When you make content for YouTube, it's not exclusive. They don't pay you to keep it there. So if your content is clean and you own the rights to everything, you could potentially sell your talk show to another big distribution platform. There are a lot of advantages to start a podcast if you're a YouTuber, which is why we started a podcast.
That's plug number 3 or 4.
I've lost track.
I've lost track. So those are our thoughts on podcasts and why a lot of YouTubers are starting their own podcasts.
If you have some podcasts that you like to listen to, make sure to comment below with those. And if you're interested in listening to the first episode of our podcast, that link is in the description.
And let us know if there's other topics that you want us to research and talk about, like anything. But like something that's like happening.
It has to be happening.
Like, you know,
Like
something
Kanye's
that's like,
tweets?
Yeah, Kanye would be good.
We could talk about
Kanye's tweets.
What else could we talk about?
That's all that's really happening.
Nothing.
Yeah, I think that's it. Okay, all right, we have a podcast. Okay.
You think we talked about the podcast enough?
I'm not sure.
Yeah. Make sure we got that point across.
Well, example, Casey launches Couples Therapy, and it's the #1 podcast on the podcast app.
So that's the first thing to understand, is that there are a lot of YouTubers with very large audiences who are able to move them to different mediums. If they are interested in starting a podcast, they know they can have some initial success.